present Choir Practice, a storm in a Welsh teacup, written by Cliff Gordon and with music taken from the Songs of Wales and from Handel's Messiah. Our cast includes Mervyn Johns, Emrys Jones, Glynis Johns and Ivor Novello. The scene is the little town of Compant.
I had not been back to the valley for over 4 years, and I was hungry at heart for the sight of home and the sound of the soft Welsh voice. Away working in London, time and distance had made Compant seem a very gentle place, where all was love and harmony, and where there was no vulgar dissension ever to disturb its peace. And indeed, when I arrived, I found the whole valley in a most benevolent temper. Everywhere there seemed to be a great fellow feeling. Those who were known for their acid tongues and sour faces wore wintry smiles. Those who were normally polite were now almost diplomatic. And all the general good humor of the village was amplified so much it seemed the very lights in cottage windows shone more brightly to add to this great glow of peace and goodwill. Each time I go home, I must, as soon as I have spent a day with my own family, make calls on all our near relations. And as in the valley nearly all of us are first, second, or third cousins, most of our holidays spent in this very pleasant manner. The Mrs. Gwither must always be first upon the list, for they are related by marriage, which neither of them ever accomplished, to almost everybody in Compant. Ever since I can remember, we children, without exception, called them Auntie Mary and Auntie Gwyneth, although the actual relationship has now become so complicated that even they no longer try to explain it. And so I set forth with the presents I had brought them from London to number 16 Sebastopol Terrace, to be fussed over, cosseted, and offered homemade wine beside the glowing comb fire in their warm, sweet-smelling kitchen.
Well, there is nice to see you again, Gwenny Vach. Well, you were looking too, isn't she, Mary?
What's that, my dear?
There is well, Gwen is looking.
Oh, yes, indeed. Very well. How was your poor Mum, Gwenny?
Very well, thank you, Auntie Mary.
Oh, that's good, yes. That's good indeed. How do you like London?
Oh, very much. I have a nice lot of girls to work with, and I'm quite happy, thank you. Oh, but I do miss the valley sometimes.
Oh, yes. It's nice to go away, but it's nice to come home again, isn't it?
I went up to London once.
Back to the people you know and the places where you were brought up, isn't it?
On a choir outing it was.
How long are you staying?
I'm going back on the mail on Friday.
Oh, not very long, then.
No.
Very nice place it was, too. All them people.
What are you mumbling away about, Mary?
London.
Well, what about London, for goodness sake?
Went there on an outing with a choir. We did Elijah.
Well, what about it, then?
Very nice place, London.
I'm sorry I wasn't home last week. I hear Bethesda Choir did Messiah wonderfully.
Oh, well, I suppose it was all right by the time they'd finished it. But you'll never guess the worry and trouble it caused.
Worry? Trouble in Compant? Well, how do you mean?
Oh, dear, it makes me cross to think of it even. Indeed, the way people carry on.
Do tell me all about it.
What are you two whispering about there?
Messiah.
No. It was Elijah we did in London.
No, Auntie Mary. Auntie Gwyneth was just telling me about the trouble they had doing Messiah this year.
Oh, yes, I see.
Well, it all started on the first choir practice in Bethesda schoolroom. Wait a minute, I'll make another pot of tea. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. The men had been passing away the time singing round the piano. Geraint Llewellyn, the insurance, he's choir master since old Parry Samuels died, came in with all the tonics all far parts. As you know, Mrs. Lloyd Undertaker have sung the contralto part for years and years. But when Geraint came to give the parts out...
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm glad to see you all in such fine voice. But we have plenty of work to do. Well, this year, as you know, we are going to do Messiah once again. Most of you present are familiar with the score, but I do want it to be better than ever before. Now, as this is the first time I have had the honor and the pleasure to be your choir master, I feel I must say that I am very conscious of the great example set by me by my late predecessor, Mr. Paris Samuels. And I can only hope that my own efforts will not disappoint you. Now, to work. I think you all have your choral parts, and I have here with me all the solos. Tenor, of course, Mr. David Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Llewellyn.
Bass, Mr. Yeston Morgan.
Thank you, Geraint, my boy.
Soprano, Miss Mavanwy Lewis-Rees.
Diolch.
And the contralto this year will be sung by Mrs. Margaret Davis.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Llewellyn.
Yes, Mrs. Boyd?
Perhaps I was mistaken, but I thought you said contralto this year will be sung by Mrs. Margaret Davis.
Those were my words.
Thank you. Thank you indeed. I thought I'd misunderstood. Clifford?
Yes, ma'am?
We're going home.
Oh, please now, Mrs. Lloyd. There's no suggestion made that...
Mr. Geraint Llewellyn, I'm not suggesting that there is any suggestion being made. I'm not either suggesting that there is any reason why Mrs. Margaret Davis should not sing contralto this year. Indeed, I'm sure the good woman will be all right. I'm sure she has quite a nice little voice. But I've been singing that part for the last 12 years, and there has never been any cause for complaint or criticism. Girl and married woman, I've been coming to this chapel and served it faithfully since before you were born, Mr. Llewellyn. And my people before me, why, indeed, our grandfather built this chapel. And I must say that I think it would have been more fit and proper had you had the decency to tell me privately, instead of humiliating me and embarrassing poor Mrs. Margaret Davis in front of friends and neighbors.
But please, let me explain.
Explain? Explain what, may I ask, young man? There's no explaining to be done. You've made the situation quite clear. I should have known by the way you accompanied her at the sale of work that there was something afoot.
And just what do you mean by that, Mrs. Lloyd, may I ask?
I mean nothing, Mrs. Davis. If you find any inference in that remark that is, well, unfortunate, then it can only be the result of your own conscience. I will be most interested to hear what the Reverend Idris Griffith will have to say concerning this situation. For I'm sure that this has been arranged with neither his knowledge or consent.
Mrs. Lloyd, the minister has given me as choir master full authority to make such changes as I think fit.
Then would you please tell me why you have thought fit to insult and embarrass a faithful chapel worker and 3 times semi-finalist?
I wish I had not to say it, Mrs. Lloyd, but after all, the last occasion when you reached a Sedgwood semi-finalist was a little while ago.
Well, oh, that I should live to see this day. Clifford!
Oh, dear, no.
Take me home, boy.
Never.
Take me home. I don't know what your father will say.
I am sorry for that most unfortunate and embarrassing scene, ladies and gentlemen, for I am sure you will understand that no offensive insult was meant.
Mr. Llewellyn.
Yes, Mrs. Davis?
Rather than cause any bad feeling in the chapel, I will willingly stand down.
Margaret, you'll do nothing of the sort. It's no fault of yours. It'd be silly for you, Geraint, to allow people to change their mind for you on the first big thing you conduct.
Yes,
I think your husband is quite right, Mrs. Davis.
Oh, very well, then, as you say. But it's not going to make for good feeling.
Now, to work, Mr. David Morris, tenor part beginning, Comfort ye my people.
Poor Geraint Llewellyn was most upset at the turn things had taken, and seeing that both the Lloyds and the Davises were important chapel people, he thought he'd better go round to see Mr. Griffith about it.
You see, Mr. Griffith, it places me in a most embarrassing position, especially as this is my first thing as choir master since poor old Mr. Samuels passed away. You have only to say the word and I will resign, for I do not want to cause a split in the chapel.
No. You say that Mrs. Lloyd, undertaker, walked out to the choir practice.
Yes, but not until after she had made a most awkward scene.
And you want to have Mrs. Margaret Davis, grocer, to sing the contralto?
Yes.
Well, I shouldn't worry about it too much. It'll probably all blow over and nothing more will be said.
I hope so too, Mr. Griffith, but you know what Mrs. Lloyd is. She's a very strong personality.
Yes, Geraint, my lad. But as you are aware, I know everybody in this valley. For as pastor, there is not one house that is not open to me.
Yes, and as insurance agent, I can say the same.
Exactly. So I am sure that between us, you and I will be able to patch up this truly regrettable and foolish episode.
But Mr. Griffith, what about the contralto part meanwhile?
Your decision shall stand. And although I shall not, indeed, I cannot, take an open side in this affair, you can count upon me for my support.
Yes.
Now, my lad, this is no more nor less than a storm in a teacup. And as such, stirring won't help. Tell me, how are you getting on with coaching the children for the concert after the social?
Oh, they're coming along nicely, thank you, Mr. Griffith. Though there's been a bit of jealousy and argument over little Mavanwy Lewis having a solo and a recitation.
Ah, well, these rows are children's affairs. And that one, no less than the grown-up one, will be over in a whip stitch. Now, what would you say to a nice cup of tea?
Well, it seemed for a day or two that was the end of that. Came Sunday, though, and for the first time in living memory, there's not a single Lloyd in chapel.
No.
Not even the Moses Lloyds, who are not really proper Lloyds.
But that must mean, well, 30 or 40 people missing.
Yes, and 20 of them in the choir.
She married one of the Davises of Bryn dress.
Who married who, Mary?
Credwan Morgan. She was a soprano in Elijah. Mr. Train down from London, she did. Met Yanto Davis in a tea shop in Paddington.
For goodness sake, Mary, what's that got to do with the choir doing the Messiah?
Oh, nothing. I just remembered it, that's all. Engine driver on the railway he was. Nice little man, too.
Oh, you mustn't take any notice of Mary. She's never been the same since her trouble. Now, where was I?
You were telling me about the Lloyds not being in chapel on Sunday morning.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, naturally, Griffith, the minister, noticed it at once. Didn't say anything in the sermon, though. But right after choir practice on the Monday, when it was plain that the Lloyds had left the choir, he went round to see Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd.
That would be Lloyd the undertaker, wouldn't it?
Yes, they live up on the hill, you know. Nice little house. T. Gwyn, it's called. Well, it seems that Mrs. and Mr. Lloyd were out when he called, but Cliff, their boy, was in. You know Cliff, don't you? Booking clerk on the railway is.
Oh, hello, Mr. Griffith.
Hello, Clifford, my boy. Well, aren't you going to ask me in?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Griffith. Come in, won't you? I'm afraid we haven't lit the fire in the front room today. Mum and Dad are going to Swansea. Come into the kitchen, will you, please? Sit down, won't you? Shall I make you a cup of tea? The kettle's boiling.
No, thank you, my boy. I called in to see how you all were.
Oh, fine, thank you very much, Mr. Griffith.
Your Mum and Dad all right?
Oh, yes, quite well, thank you, Mr. Griffith.
You were not working yesterday, were you?
No.
Oh, well, I'm glad to know that you're all quite well. I wondered how you all were. Thought you must be ill, not seeing you in chapel.
Oh, no, we're all quite well, thank you, Mr. Griffith.
Then I shall be seeing you all next Sunday, I suppose.
Well, I don't exactly know, Mr. Griffith.
No?
Well, you must surely have heard that Mum is very, very upset about the choir and not singing a usual part this year.
I had heard there was a little difficulty there.
A little indeed. Oh, I beg your pardon. It's most awkward, especially for me.
For you, Clifford?
Well, yes, sir. You see, me and Alwyn Davis have been, we're sort of cotting, you see.
Oh, indeed. And with this little difference, you find it difficult to see her?
Difficult? Why, it's damn near... Oh, I'm sorry. It's pretty nigh impossible.
Nothing is impossible that is good and desirable, my boy.
No, sir. But I'd like to know how you're going to get Mum to believe that it's either good or desirable for her not to sing the part.
She is not an unreasonable woman, your mother.
No, but once Mum's made up her mind, she can be very firm, you know.
I should hate to lose her. She has been a great help to us all.
Yes.
Then I shall see you all on Sunday, then.
That's up to Griffith, Mr. Griffith.
I see. By the way...
Yes?
How old are you, Clifford?
22 next month.
And Alwyn?
Only a week between us.
Well, you're a man now. You should begin to know your own mind.
Should I, sir?
Yes, indeed. Remember, nothing is impossible that is good and desirable. Nothing. Well, tell your mother and father I was sorry to miss them. Goodbye for now.
Ah, yes. Mr. Griffith, the minister, is a wise and good man. He's been a help and comfort both to us all in the valley. But I doubt if even he was wise enough to see the trouble that was brewing.
But all this is so unlike, my dear companion. Quarrels and arguments in the chapel.
Yes, my dear, but every now and then the best amongst us are liable to burst out. Oh, and I think it does us good.
Kettle's boiling, Gwyneth.
Yes, my dear, I'll make fresh in a minute. There is terrors we are for tea, indeed. I don't know what we do without our lodger. He can't abide tea at any price.
Who is he?
Guard on the railway, foreigner, comes from Newport. Well, I was telling you about the fuss. Talking about railways, you know young Clifford is booking clerk at the station, as I told you. Well, Alwyn goes up to Cardiff now and then to do shopping for her dada. Naturally, she had to buy a ticket. Naturally, she had to get it from Cliff. And very naturally, she had to talk to him.
Cheap day return to Cardiff, please. Oh, Clifford.
Alwyn back. Come round the back. I want to talk to you.
Oh, I can't, Cliff.
Why not?
Bessie Lewis Milk is watching me.
Oh, never mind Bessie Lewis, that old gossip. Look back. Mr. Griffiths, the minister, was round at our house yesterday morning, and he suggested, at least I think that is what he suggested.
What?
That me and you should run away and get married.
There's the thing to be saying. Run away and get married, indeed. I won't hear of it. Besides, where could we run to?
There's a chap I was in the army with, lives in London. Perhaps he'd put us up.
But think back. The scandals. It would be in all the papers. I could never hold my head up in the valley again.
But we wouldn't be in the valley then, girl.
Valley or no valley, London or no London, I won't hear any more of such talk. There's the train coming in. I've got to go now.
But Alwyn...
I'm not listening no more.
Alwyn, come back.
You forgot your change, love.
That was on the Tuesday. But in a day or two's time, it was plain that the Lloyds were not ready to accept any olive branch or give one. For the whole family, including old Mrs. Jonah Lloyd, took away their custom from Davis the shop and bought everything they wanted either at the Co-op or sent to Swansea for it.
Nothing much in Swansea Market last Saturday.
And then, to cap it all, old Ebenezer Davis up and dies aged 98, and the Davis sent to Pontedillis for an undertaker who was a fifth cousin of theirs.
Bessie Lewis Milk told me she couldn't even get a loaf of bread.
Of course, seeing as there are not many funerals in the valleys, and the Lloyds have buried everybody in living memory, and the Davises have fed us all for generations, well, it was a very awkward situation and was bound to make things most difficult.
So the Davises couldn't get buried, and the Lloyds couldn't eat?
Not without losing face, they couldn't. Well, things came really out into the open for the first time on the following Saturday night. There was a smoking concert in the Miners' Welfare. Young David Morris was singing David of the White Rock. The place was full packed. Lloyds and Davises mixed up anyhow.
Nice your meat lies, lies ang elvelhin. David tir dadrev achwarai truir glin. Derin var me bid far where i dant. De och benediceo
It's fine that boy is coming on. He's David Morris's boy, isn't he?
Aye. Is Dad a fine voice too?
Aye. Some fine voices in this valley. Always have been.
That is as it might be, but there are some who put their own petty conceits above the art and the beauty of good singing.
Hush, boy, Seth Lloyd is just behind you.
Well, it's true. That little Mrs. Davies has a fine contralto voice. She was Madame Margaret Lewis before she married, remember?
Shush, ma'am. You'll only cause an old bother.
There is no need to be afraid to speak the truth, and them as can't face it should.
Speaking as a member of the Lloyd family, there is more than one opinion to be considered, in my opinion. And this is neither the place nor the time to be considering it either.
What Llewellyn Insurance said is quite true. Mrs. Lloyd has been good in her time.
You shall not speak of my kin in this place.
Truth needs no special housing, man. I'll shout it from the top of Brynidris if I want to.
But you'll not say to me or to any of mine.
Quiet, you two. Where is your sense causing an old row and vulgar quarrel on such a subject? It's not decent, no proper.
It is that silly old crow, Meyer Lloyd, trying to make out she can out-sing a thrush that is causing the quarrel.
Well, you asked for it, Yanto Davis.
Bessie Lewis the milk told us next morning that there was a high old fight and damages came to £3 7 and 6. Seth Lloyd got a black eye and one of the Davis boys lost a front tooth. Oh, the older people in the village were shocked and grieved, for such a thing does not happen in Compant, and many people tried to reconcile the two families, but things had come to such a pass that it was too far gone. Oh, it must have been pretty awkward for Geraint Llewellyn too, for he had to call on both Lloyds and Davises to collect weekly insurance. Indeed, he came round to us immediately after he'd been to the Lloyds. white as a sheet he was, too. Oh, and trembling. I made the poor lad have a cup of tea and sit down and tell us all about it. It seems when he got there, the Lloyds was just sitting down to dinner.
Somebody at the front door. I'll go. It's Geraint Llewellyn.
What's he want?
Insurance, of course.
Oh.
Well, ask the man in. We don't want to show no ill feeling. Righto. Come in, Mr. Llewellyn, will you?
Good afternoon, Mr. Lloyd. Mrs. Lloyd?
Good afternoon, Mr. Llewellyn.
How's choir practice coming along?
Oh, quite nicely, thank you.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad to hear it. Very glad to hear it. Of course, I expect you miss Mr. Parry Samuels. There's a fine choir master he was.
Yes, he was a fine musician.
He was a grand musician. Knew Messiah backwards. Never a moment's trouble or argument in the 15 years he was conducting.
Now, aren't you going to offer Mr. Llewellyn a cup of tea, girl?
Certainly. There's a cup in the pot. Pour Mr. Llewellyn a cup of tea, Clifford.
Oh, no, thank you. I'm sure I've just had a cup.
At the Davises, I suppose. All right, Cliff. Put the cup back. Oh, well, must give you our insurance money, I suppose. Big week this week, isn't it?
Yes, Mrs. Lloyd.
There. That right?
Quite right, thank you. Well, I must be going now.
Yes. Show Mr. Llewellyn to the door, Clifford.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Llewellyn. Give my love to your mother, won't you?
Thank you. I will do that. Well, good afternoon.
There's just one thing.
Yes?
I hope you won't mind, but a friend of mine, a lady who's got her LRAM and who has a fine opinion of my voice, was talking with me here yesterday about the tonic sulfar part of Messiah. She was wanting to borrow them for her pupils.
But, Mrs. Lloyd, we've only got one set.
If you look on the cover, you will see that they are my property. I lent them to the chapel over 10 years ago when we first did the oratorio.
But we can't.
Oh, I'm sorry to insist. But I must have them back, I'm afraid. I promised the woman, you see.
Very well, then, Mrs. Lloyd. I shall collect them up at choir practice tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Llewellyn. I hope it's not inconvenient. Cliff, show Mr. Llewellyn out.
Yes, ma'am. I'm ever so sorry, Geraint.
Sorry, boyo, what's wrong?
Ma'am asking for them old parts back.
Oh, don't you worry. I'll have to get new copies down from London.
Oh. How's he coming?
Well, there's no denying that I could do with some of the voices that are in your family, but we're working away at it.
How far you got?
Tonight, we shall have practically got the trumpet shall sound ready for performance.
Oh, I should love to hear it.
Then why don't you pop in after we've started? Go up in the schoolroom gallery.
I think I will. Well, so long for now, Geraint. And don't let them get you down.
Don't worry, lad. If it's to be a fight, it'll be a fight to the finish.
And returned very nice. Somebody with more sense of humour than was good for them had written some rather impolite things on the cover of one part, and that added further fuel to the fire.
Did you have any particular sympathies, Auntie Gwyneth?
Well, yes and no, my dear. You see, your Auntie Mary can't get around much these days, and that ties me to the house. So unless we are friends with everybody, we can only hear one side of any little bit of gossip.
Well, didn't the Davises row openly?
Yes, but not so openly, for after all anybody had to do to spite them was to buy their goods elsewhere, but to spite the Lloyds who had to die. Of course, there was trouble aplenty when the voting was on.
The voting?
Urban District Council election.
Oh, yes.
The row had just been getting over the upset in the welfare when polling day came. It turned out dead equal. As many Lloyds as Davis is on the council.
What about poor little Olwyn and Clifford?
Why, we're just coming to that. Oh, but look at your Auntie Mary. Fast asleep she is.
No, I'm not that. And I can hear every word you were saying.
Then what are we saying?
You were telling Gwenny about little Olwyn and Cliff. I think it must have been Griffith who put the idea into the boy's head.
What idea, Auntie Mary?
Well, you remember Gwyneth told you about Griffith, the minister, going up to Teigwyn and only finding young Clifford in.
Yes.
Well, Olwen was telling me that on the following Friday she was going up to Cardiff again for the day. Cliff didn't say nothing when she bought a ticket, but straight away got young Shreddy Owens to take over and travelled up on the same train. He missed her at Cardiff General, but he knew she would be going to have tea in the Oriental.
Olwen.
Oh, Cliff, you shouldn't come and sit by me.
Why not?
Somebody might see us. Somebody from Cumpan.
Oh, Hungariaddi. It's more than a week now since I saw you. To talk to, I mean?
Yes.
You do still love me, don't you?
Oh, yes. Yes, I do.
Then what are we going to do, my lovely?
About what?
Getting married, Carrier.
Oh, as long as this old row lasts, they'll never let us.
I have a feeling that this row will not end until we end it.
But how on earth can we do that?
By getting married.
My mum would have a fit if I only mentioned it.
Well, then, don't mention it.
But I couldn't do that.
Oh, but you could. You're gone 21.
That's no reason to disobey my mum. Besides, it would mean registry office, and I told you before that would never do.
No. Now listen, Ra. We don't have to do that. Will you trust me?
Well, yes. Yes, I will.
Look then. I think I can get Mr. Griffith to call a meeting of the chapel congregation after the social concert next Wednesday.
But your family would never go.
If Mr. Griffith asked them special, they would. He's most persuasive.
Well, what then? Oh, wouldn't it be awful if your cousin Seth started another fight?
I'll bet even Mum would join in.
Cliff.
Yes, my lovely?
Your mum.
What about her?
Does she really, truly mind so much?
No, Carrier, I don't think so. Only, you see, in all the long, hard-working year, cooking, washing, tending on the family hand and foot, well, when choir practice time came round, it meant a bit of life and importance for her outside our own home. And then, when the performance came round, she was no longer Mrs. Lloyd, the undertaker. She was Madame Maya Lloyd, contralto.
Yes, but it's the same for my mum, too,
Yes,
remember?
Hungariad. But Mum never expected all this fuss. So I've really seen her so happy. All this excitement and intrigue. Like a bird, she is.
Our mother is worried stiff. She's so upset at being the cause of all this fuss.
Don't you worry your pretty head, my darling. We can settle this, I think. I hope.
What do we do then?
Mr. Griffith will surely help. Remember, Dada and your father are both deacons.
Yes?
Well, then, if Mr. Griffith insists, none of the family will dare to stay away from the meeting after the social next Wednesday.
No, for they're all fair and admit that Mr. Griffith has carried himself with dignity and impartiality throughout it all.
Yes. And then the minute the concert at the end of the social's over, I will get him to speak to them.
Oh, speaking won't be much good.
Perhaps not. But if that fails...
Mr. Griffith.
What is it, Geraint?
No sign of the Lloyds yet.
Not a sign, but they will surely come.
I don't know so much.
Here's Clifford now.
Geraint,
Oh, hello, Cliff. Where's all your family?
They're here.
Where?
Outside.
Outside?
Yes, they've been waiting for nearly half an hour.
But it's pouring rain coming down in buckets.
I know, but they won't come in until the social's over.
This is the last item now. Go and tell them to come in.
Righto. They'll be pretty glad too. Seth and Dad have caught their death already, I think.
Good evening, Mr. Lloyd, Mrs. Lloyd, Seth. Good evening, all of you. Take off your things, won't you? There's plenty of seats.
No, thank you, Mr. Griffiths. We're quite all right standing.
But you might as well as be comfortable.
I might point out that we haven't come here to enjoy ourselves.
I see. Oh, Mr. Richards, Mr. Morgan, pump up the lamps, would you please? Thank you. I am sure that you are all well aware of the reason why I've asked you all to remain. For the past few weeks, I have been greatly distressed to see the peace of this village destroyed by argument and unfriendliness. The cause of the trouble has little to do with subsequent developments. Indeed, I am sure that had a little more tact and patience been exercised at the start, all of this need never have happened. Although I know that no party here present has any censure of the technical ability of Mr. Geraint Llewellyn. And as far as the two ladies are concerned, I feel certain that there is some amicable way of settling this situation. It is an evil and grievous thing that we, engaged upon such an endeavor, should find cause for dissension and argument. Were it not that in all the years I have been your pastor, I have come to know and love you all for the good, kind people that you are, I should be more than distressed. As it is, I am sure that there is nothing wrong here that cannot be settled by a little friendly chat. Has no one anything to say? Mrs. Lloyd? Mrs. Davis?
Mr. Griffith.
Yes? What is it, Clifford, my boy?
Let me speak to them, will you?
Certainly. Mr. Clifford Lloyd would like to speak to you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Griffith, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you will not think it impertinent or forward of me to speak as I do now before the elders of my family and of the chapel. But I have something to say which I am sure will be of interest to you all and has got quite a lot to do with the matter in question.
And therefore,
I feel it to be no more than my bounden duty
to speak to you all.
Bounden duty to speak. Oh, hang it, Owen. They're your people and my people, and they've known us both since we were babies. What's the use of trying to make speeches? Ma'am, I know that in your heart you don't care tuppence those things at contrasto, but you're so disappointed. You allowed yourself to make a scene, and are too ashamed now to go back on it. And you, Mrs. Davis, I am sure it doesn't worry you either. As for the rows and fights, well, there are rows and fights every day about things that don't matter, and are forgotten in 2 minutes, as this silly fuss should have been, and Well, the point of the matter is this. Mr. Davis, Olwen and me are in love. I loved her with all my heart, Mr. Davis. And Olwen says she feels the same way about me.
Oh, I do, carry it on, Will.
Yes, and we are not ashamed to stand here in front of all of you, even though this old quarrel is making us both very unhappy. For you, whom we love, claim our loyalties too. Surely it is wrong and wicked of you to make us feel ashamed to see one another, for we do love one another truly. Please, please end this squabble and fuss. Now, tonight. Have you nothing to say to us? Nothing? Very well then. Olwen, come up by here, my lovely. Now listen, all of you. If we cannot live our own lives with your consent and blessing, we shall do it our own way. Tomorrow morning, Olwen and I will go to the register office and there be made man and wife.
But you can't do that, man.
Oh, yes, I can and will. We're both of age and in our right minds, which is more than we should be able to say for all of you if you don't behave yourselves. Mr. Davis, is there any reason why, if things were normal, you would refuse me your daughter, Olwen?
No, not one, my lad.
Mrs. Lloyd, aren't I good enough for your boy?
Oh, there's a shame you are making me. I never meant to cause such trouble.
Oh, no, Mama.
I've been vain and silly and making a fool of myself. Mrs. Davis, will you ever forgive me?
Of course, my dear. But there's nothing to forgive. There has been no quarrel between us. It's only the old men and things that have been carrying on. Come on now, love. Dry your eyes. You shall sing the contralto, and I know you'll do it lovely.
Oh, there's a shame, Diane. Quarreling and making our two babies unhappy. No, my dear, I shall never sing the contralto. You shall not me.
Oh, never mind there now.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I must point out that Mrs. Davis and Mrs. Lloyd are the only two first-rate contraltos in the choir, so one of them has got to sing.
Yes, that is true. Tell me, Mr. Llewellyn, could the role be shared?
Oh, I suppose that it could be done, Mr. Griffith, though it's hardly traditional, is it?
Then shared it must be. Both good ladies shall delight us.
Mr. Griffith, what about Olwen and me?
Your families have given their consent, have they not? Then shall you, as your mothers and fathers were before you, be married here in Bethesda. Right then, so are our troubles over, and the valley at peace again.
And so, as Auntie Mary dozed and Gwyneth chatted on, did I hear the story of that eventful choir practice. How Olwen and Cliff came to be married, and what Olwen wore, and who was there, and what presents were given. And as I listened, I understood the sweetness of the valley, and the gentle temper of its people. For folly though the quarrel may have been, it cut across the placid pattern of their lives, and for a while it paced beside them in their work, the cleaning, washing, darning, cooking, shortening the winter months and bringing color to the dark grey hills. Oh, and by the way, the role was never shared, much to her relief, for she found when rehearsing that age had made a difference to her voice. Mrs. Lloyd fell downstairs and badly sprained her ankle. So little Mrs. Davis did sing it after all. Oh, and I wish I had been there to hear it. For in my valley, it is their hearts that sing.
This has been Musical Theatre of the Air presenting Choir Practice, a play for broadcasting by Cliff Gordon, with incidental music arranged from the songs of Wales by Hal Evans and excerpts from Handel's Messiah. Those taking part were Ivan Novello as Llewellyn the choirmaster, Glynis Johns as Olwyn Davis, Mervyn Johns as the Reverend Idris Griffith, Emrys Jones, by permission of First Shepherd, as Fifth Lloyd, Crigwen Lewis, Gwen Jones, Maudie Edwards, Gwyneth Gwither, Madeline Thomas, Mary Gwither, Elwyn Brooke Jones, by permission of Jack Hilton, James Lloyd, Rachel Thomas, Maya Lloyd, Edward Palmer, Winford Davis, Betty Bucknell, Margaret Davis, Trevor Jones, David Morris the tenor, Tom Williams, Yestin Morgan the baritone, Cliff Gordon, a gentle minor, John Glyn Jones, a fierce minor, Harry Parry, a negative minor, Edward Reese, Seth. The St. David Singers as the miners and villagers, with the BBC Chorus, Chorus Master Leslie Woodgate, and Augmented BBC Review Orchestra, leader Boris Pecker, conducted by Frank Cantell. Maurice Vinden was at the organ.